Welcome to On Strike, a production of Workers Strike Back. I'm Emily MacArthur. Thousands of New York City legal aid workers, most of them unionized with Association of Legal Advocates and Attorneys, ALAA, UAW Local 2325, went on strike last month, demanding higher wages across the board and to raise the wage floor to $70,000 a year, the bare minimum necessary to keep pace with the overall cost of living crisis, with rapid inflation and skyrocketing rents. At the same time, legal aid workers in Ohio are fighting to get unionized with UAW. 78% of attorneys, paralegals, advocates, administrative assistants, and other union-eligible staff at a legal aid NGO in Dayton, Defiance, and Toledo, Ohio, are collectively demanding that their employer voluntarily recognize their right to organize a union. The Ohio Legal Aid Workers aim to become the newest chapter of the National Organization of Legal Service Workers, which is unionized as UAW Local 2320. This union represents 7,000 rank-and-file legal services, human services, healthcare, and farm workers from coast to coast. UAW Local 2320 has also been calling for Medicare for All and a massive nationwide expansion of publicly funded, affordable social housing. The union has also passed a resolution calling for an arms embargo to Israel, among other anti-imperialist measures. The Ohio legal aid workers are fighting back after the management at their NGO nonprofit refused to recognize their union despite the overwhelming majority of workers signing their union cards. The NGO is shamefully using various union-busting tactics, such as trying to create new positions and filling them with anti-union personnel and withholding raises that they had already promised to the workers. Workers Strike Back stands in solidarity with the legal aid workers both in Ohio and New York. Like so many public sector workers, or in this case, employees of publicly funded NGOs, New York City legal aid attorneys are being forced to fight for these most basic things because of the endless attacks on their living standards with wave after wave of austerity. These attacks are bipartisan, carried out by both parties of the billionaire class, the Democrats and Republicans. Workers Strike Back member Justin Smeltzer recently met with New York City legal aid attorney and UAW Local 2325 member Navaruz Baum. Justin himself is also a member of UAW Local 974 in Peoria, Illinois, where he works as an electrician at a Caterpillar plant. Navaruz and Justin talked about the legal aid workers' strike, what these workers are fighting for, and how things have developed since the strike began. In addition to sorely needed wage increases, the workers have also been fighting for workload protections in a context in which they are greatly overworked, burdened with extreme caseloads. They have been calling for protections against persecution for their political views, for example, for members being targeted for opposing the genocide in Gaza. The Association of Legal Advocates and Attorneys represents over 3,000 public interest attorneys and advocates in New York City metro area. They fight for justice for poor and low-income New Yorkers in housing court, welfare centers, unemployment offices, administrative hearings for food stamps, federal disability benefits at Medicaid, eviction court, criminal defense, foreclosure, immigration, and employment law. The strike started with several different shops that had not previously organized together, totaling over 700 workers. Union members who work for Legal Aid Society, another shop organized by the UAW union, joined the strike about a week later, which brought over 1,000 more workers onto the picket lines. Altogether, about 2,000 workers were involved in this contract fight. They coordinated their struggle, their demands, and to get their contract expiration dates aligned. This method of striking all at once across one sector is a powerful tool in the hands of workers. Already, it has caused serious delays and disruptions in the eviction machine of the courts, showing the real potential to escalate and consciously shut down the city's court system, and used as a lever to force major concessions from the bosses, in this case, the New York City's Democratic Party-controlled pro-corporate mayoral and city council administration. The Democratic Party, which controls the mayor's office with Eric Adams and has 45 out of 51 seats on the New York City Council, has catastrophically and chronically underfunded legal aid, including for immigration or housing defense cases. This is absolutely shameful in general, but especially now. More and more vulnerable working people are in need of these legal services as the Trump administration carries out its brutal crackdown on immigrants. Rent has been skyrocketing in New York City, which was already a notoriously expensive place to live. In 2023, average wages in NYC increased by 1.2%, while the median rent soared by 8.6%. Many working class and poor renters find themselves in eviction court due to obscenely high rents in NYC. Having an attorney dramatically reduces the chance that a working class or poor renter gets evicted, and yet nationally, 90% of renters don't have access to legal representation in eviction court. Increasingly, young workers who get jobs wanting to make a positive impact on their communities working for NGOs are realizing that a boss is a boss, even if they wrap themselves in progressive language. The leadership of the NGO nonprofit organizations that these union members work for have failed to stand up and fight the city and state governments to win higher taxes on the rich to fully fund the necessary legal aid for working class and oppressed New Yorkers, and dramatic improvements to the living standards of the legal aid workers. The top administrators of the NGOs are paying themselves around $300,000 a year salaries, while the legal aid attorneys on the front lines are barely scraping by on the pitiful wages offered to them. New York City is home to Wall Street and some of the wealthiest corporations and billionaires on earth. There's no shortage of money to pay livable wages to these workers. To win demands like these, working people and union members need to organize mass rallies and protests to build momentum to tax the rich in New York City, to pay for all services needed by working and poor people. We should connect fights like these to fund existing services like legal aid, to go on the offensive to fight for strong citywide rent control on all rental units and an end to deportations. It's very important that Democratic mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani of the Democratic Socialists of America has been campaigning on taxing the rich to pay for free childcare, free transit, and affordable food at public grocery stores. There's an urgent need to build a massive fight back, mobilizing tens of thousands of working class New Yorkers to win taxes on the rich, to fund the needs of millions of working people. An approach of trying to negotiate with Wall Street and the Democratic Party establishment, as unfortunately Mamdani has been pointing toward, is simply not going to work. Instead, Mamdani and NYC council members Tiffany Caban, Alexa Aviles, and Shahana Hanif from the Democratic Socialists of America should be working to actively build fighting movements that openly declare war on the political establishment, including the Democrats, rather than viewing them as potential allies. Alongside union members and working people here in Seattle, Worker Strike Back co-founder Shama Sawant used her Socialist City Council office to build mass movements and win working class victories. In 2020, our movement fought the Democratic Party and the city's elite and organized mass rallies and democratically organized action conferences to win the Amazon tax, a tax on Amazon and other big businesses. The Amazon tax raises hundreds of millions of dollars every year to fund affordable housing, including dedicated funds of millions of dollars annually in historically black neighborhoods. In 2021, through her annual People's Budget campaign, Shama's office also won public funds for the right to a free lawyer for anyone facing eviction in Seattle. Shama also launched the 15 Now movement, which won the nation's first major city $15 minimum wage that is now the nation's highest minimum wage at $20.76. Shama was able to use one single elected Socialist City Council office to win victory after historic victory by building powerful movements of working people. This example shows what is possible through working class struggle, and it is a model that DSA in New York City should be learning from if they want to win substantial victories for working people against the rich and New York Democratic machine. Our guest even points to these kinds of lessons when he addresses how legal aid jobs like his were even won in the first place, by fighting movements of tenants unions. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to On Strike if you haven't already done so. If you've been watching On Strike, you know we bring coverage, political analysis, and strategy for the working class of the kind you simply won't find in the mainstream media. Become a member of Worker Strike Back to help ensure we can continue to build our movements against the billionaires and their political servants, and so that On Strike can continue to bring the kind of discussion about strategy needed to fight back and win. We don't run any ads, we don't accept any corporate money, and we rely on donations from working people like you. Go to workerstrikeback.org and click on Become a Member. As we'll hear about in the interview, Navrouz's coworkers recently reached a tentative agreement, though a section of legal aid workers are still on strike as of the time of filming this episode. Now we'll go to Justin and Navrouz to hear more about the strike.
Navrouz, first off, welcome to On Strike. Thanks for taking the time to do the interview.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Navrouz, you and your fellow rank and file members in associations of legal advocates and attorneys unionized with UAW Local 2325 are currently on strike, as are UAW members at New York Legal Aid Assistance Group. How long have you been on strike for, and what are the specific demands your strike is calling for at your specific workplace at New York Legal Aid Assistance Group?
Yeah, so I'm a paralegal at the New York Legal Assistance Group. We went on strike last Tuesday, and we actually just won a tentative agreement late Monday night or early yesterday morning. This is part of our sectoral strike. So there's about 2,000 workers. We all aligned our contracts to expire together, and we had a common set of demands, and we were coordinating our contract campaign. Some of those shops are still on strike. Some of those shops management has agreed to settle. In terms of the sectoral demands, the main one was to raise the wage floor for our sector. Many workers, myself included, made as little as around $50,000 or even less, which is not a livable salary in New York City. One of our main demands was to raise the wage floor to 70,000. In our final agreement, we raised the wage floor from 50,000 to 65,500, a 50,000 a $15,000 raise. Really excited about that. We also wanted to improve our workload protections. Many of us are just really overworked, which obviously impacts our quality of life, but it also really impacts the quality of service we're able to provide to our clients. I do eviction defense. Many of my fellow workers in my local do criminal defense, immigration defense, family defense. And we're all funded by public grants, by the city, by the state. And so we're serving folks that usually can't afford private attorneys. And that means that the state that our society is happy to overlook these clients and happy for them to get attorneys and caseworkers that are overloaded and aren't so concerned with the quality of service that's being provided. But we're very concerned with the quality of service that our clients are getting. We're very concerned with being able to provide the top tier service, the top tier legal representation that every single member of the working class deserves. And so that was another really important reason that we wanted strong workload protections. And we were able to win stronger workload protections in this contract. The last thing that we were fighting for was free speech protections. Our management, ever since the genocide that intensified on after October 7th, our management has been on a tear of disciplining workers and trying to silence our political speech on Palestine. And they've used Palestine as the tip of the spear, but they've even expanded their campaign of intimidation to include more generic bread and butter activism in the workplace, disciplining workers for two workers who simply delivered a petition protesting an unjust termination. And so it was really important for us going into this contract campaign to win free speech protections. And in the end, we were able to win a clause that protects free speech outside the workplace. One thing that really concerned us at the bargaining table is management had said that they wanted to retain the ability to discipline us for posting on our private personal social media, things like Free Palestine or I Stand with Israel. And we were able to win a free speech protection clause that protects our expressions outside the workplace and means that management will not be able to interfere with that.
Yeah, that's great. I definitely want to get back to talking about Palestine here in a little bit, and the genocide in Gaza. But can you talk specifically about like some of the things that the legal aid attorneys and the workers, at these places that are on strike, why their work is so important for the working class and poor people of New York City? What kind of things they're, services they're providing for those people?
So we represent in my local there's various different legal services. It's all defense. It's a lot of criminal defense, immigration, family, and I do tenant rights. I'll say my job specifically exists because the tenants movement in New York City won it. They demanded that my job be created a few years ago, and the city was forced to create this right to counsel program, which provides eviction defense attorneys to workers who are in eviction proceedings. Housing is really exploitative in New York City, as in the rest of the country. And so many renters are evicted really arbitrarily by landlords. And both the law on paper and the law in practice is really stacked against tenants. The existence of my job and the existence of tenant attorneys doesn't solve that. Evictions still happen, and even though they shouldn't be, but it is an important concession that the tenants movement has won. The creation of our jobs, it adds a little friction to the eviction process. We're often able to delay cases. We're able to prevent the worst abuses of completely lawless evictions. And so landlords are still able to evict tenants, but there are some hoops they have to jump through because the tenant movement won the creation of our jobs. And I'm really proud, and it's a real honor to be able to do this work that the tenant movement won funding for. Eviction defense is the work I'm most familiar with. But I would say I think the similar concepts apply to criminal defense and immigration defense and family defense. These are processes that shouldn't be happening at all. None of our jobs should have to exist. And I think that, that's something that me and my coworkers talk about a lot. But as long as these systems do exist, as long as the prison and industrial complex exists, as long as the deportation machine exists, as long as the state interference in families and taking away people's children exists, I think we are really proud and really happy that we're here at least to create a little bit of friction in those processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess like back to like the sectorial bargaining strategy you were talking about using where with everyone going on strike at once. Can you explain why you chose to use that strategy? And did this strategy help you collectively decide demands like across all of local 2325, or was everything on an individual workplace basis?
Legal services in New York City used to be just one organization. It used to just be the Legal Aid Society. And the kind of the legal services industry really exploded in the wake of Gideon, the Gideon Supreme Court case that guaranteed um, folks representation in criminal cases. And for a long time, the Legal Aid Society was the only provider. The city contracted them to provide criminal defense, and that gave those workers incredible power. They unionized in 1969, and throughout the 70s and the 80s, they struck repeatedly, and they won enormous concessions, turning what was initially really high turnover jobs, legal services jobs, low pay, not great benefits. Um, for many folks, it was kind of a temporary job that they would kind of stop in part of like a larger legal career. And over the 70s and the 80s, and through these multiple strikes, they were able to turn these jobs into careers. They vastly increased salaries, they improved benefits. They also really improved service conditions. They won things like continuity of representation. Initially, defendants would get a new attorney at each appearance. That meant that the attorney would show up, they wouldn't be familiar with the case, and the attorney would kind of have to scramble to figure it out, and there wouldn't be any sort of attorney-client relationship. And in 1973, the attorney struck and won continuity of representation. This is something that management didn't want, that the courts didn't want, that legislators didn't want, because it meant that they had to invest more resources. But it really improved client services, and it's something that only happened because workers struck. Similarly, through the 70s and 80s, workers struck and won things like really basic things like office phones, so they could call their clients and call lawyers and other folks. They won private meeting spaces with clients, so they didn't have to just talk to clients in the hall. In the 90s, there was a lot of reaction and neoliberal policies across the country and including in New York City, and Giuliani was the mayor at the time. So in 1994, when the union contract was up for renegotiation, Giuliani decided to make an example of the legal services attorneys. And that was also on the eve of he was about to bargain contracts with public workers in every sector. So he was really tired of the gains that criminal defense attorneys were making for themselves, for their clients. He wasn't fans of either of them. And so he decided in the late 90s, he decided to break the union power and break this density. And he created all these alternate providers. in every borough to de-unionize the sector, and he did that very successfully. But if you fast forward 30 years, or back in 2018, my local, we started unionizing all these alternate providers that were created in the late 90s. And now we're back up to about 95% density in the legal services sector in New York City. And kind of the next step, once we unionized everyone, was to coordinate our bargaining. The system was created in the late 90s was this bidding system. So to force organizations to bid against each other and create a race to the bottom to cut wages, to make legal services more of a rubber stamp than a meaningful defense. And reunionizing the sector was really important, but even once we were reunionized, we were still pitted against each other. And we would go to the bargaining table, and management would say, well, you need to accept not having higher wages because we need to be competitive against the other legal services providers for the next time, for the next bidding round. And we were just really tired of that. And we wanted to turn the tables on our management. We wanted to turn the tables on the city. And so that's why we aligned all of our contracts to expire together on July 1st of this year. Last year, we held a bargaining convention with delegates. I think almost 200 delegates from across our local, from every shop, where we decided these demands, and then we spent 2 days debating different resolutions, debating what our demands should be, and then we put all the resolutions that passed to a vote of the full membership, and every member had the opportunity to vote in ranking and prioritizing those demands. And then based on those resolutions and that ranking, those were our demands going into this round of bargaining. And so things like the 70K wage floor, that was one of the top ranked demands that members ranked coming out of the convention. And so we fought for that 70K wage floor at every single shop. And so management was no longer able to say, oh, you need to accept less than 70K because we need to be competitive. Because we were able to say, well, we're bargaining for this at every shop. And in fact, management over there has agreed to it. And so you need to agree to it too, because you don't want us all to lose all your workers to go over there. And I think that was really successful. We were able to win gains that we have just haven't even been on the table in past bargaining cycles.
Yeah, absolutely. That I love the whole strategy of, striking across one sector all at once, or at least aligning the contract in that way, because it really can, cause problems for the bosses. In that trying to pit worker against worker, it really has extra strength in the unity of all the workers in one sector. I noticed that, as part of that sectoral bargaining campaign, you did a kickoff rally, and I wondered if you had future rallies that are going to be happening as far as, like, as other workplaces like Legal Aid Society that's set to go on strike July 25th. If their demands aren't met, how do you think that will affect things? Do you think it's important to bring in, like, more community members into larger rallies, building active solidarity across working people from all of New York, to increase the pressure on the bosses, across the sector, and also on the city government, to supply more money for legal aid? Are there plans for more rallies? And how do you think Legal Aid Society coming into the strike will help, if they do, other workers who are already on strike winning their demands?
Yeah, first on the rallies, I don't know specifically about rallies. I will say we've been doing a lot of joint pickets. We've all been going to each other's pickets. On some days, we've been doing joint pickets, like one office, one shop, all the workers go to another picket, and then the next day they do the opposite and they trade. And I think that the cross shop solidarity has been really crucial to the sectoral effort. It's something we've been doing from the beginning, beginning with our sectoral convention last year. It's very new. It's a relatively new thing for our local to have all these shops. For decades, it was just a legal aid society. And so we've been learning how to build that sectoral identity and this cross-shop solidarity. And I think that we've had a lot of success. I mean, I'm at NILAG, but I've made so many friends at other shops. I've become very familiar with the issues and the struggles that are happening at other shops, which are often almost exactly identical to the ones happening at my shop. And we have a sectoral update newsletter that goes out every morning that has a roundup of bargaining and what's going on, the pickets that's going on at every shop. I've seen folks from many shops on my picket. And so I've been really excited to see kind of all the cross-shop solidarity that's been building through this sectoral strike. In terms of the impact of a strike from the Legal Aid Society, they're the biggest shop in our sector. That's 1,100 workers. So last Friday, uh, 750 workers across six different shops were on strike. On Sunday, Bronx Defenders settled, and then Monday night, NILAG settled. But before that, 750 workers were on strike across six shops. That was really impacting courts. The city is very interested in keeping courts open. They're very interested in making sure that they're able to prosecute criminal defendants, and they're very interested in making sure the eviction mill could keep running. And we challenge that by having 750 legal services workers on strike. If the Legal Aid Society goes on strike, that's 1,100 additional workers. That will more than double the number of legal services workers on strike, and that will severely impact the operation of the courts. And I do think that the city will be forced to make even more concessions than they already have.
So, you mentioned that Bronx Defenders and NILAG already, reached agreements, but those are still yet to be voted on. So, are you and Bronx Defenders workers staying on strike with everyone else until the agreement gets voted on, or is everyone going back to work, or how's that working? And then also, are there other ways, planned to increase the pressure on the bosses if they don't give in to the demands soon? I mean, obviously, Legal Aid Society, like we talked about. But this kind of just goes with like what other strategies are there, if any, or is it mostly just, adding raw numbers and community picketing and that?
I'm back at work. We're taking our time as a membership, to review the tentative agreement right now. We're doing town halls, and ultimately we'll have a ratification vote within the next week. And we'll decide whether we want to ratify this contract or not. If we don't ratify, I expect we'll go back out on strike. And the same process is happening at the Bronx Defenders. In terms of pressure on the city, withholding our labor is the biggest thing, right? Shutting down the courts, shutting down the processes that the city is very interested in maintaining is our main source of leverage. We do have a number of other levers of pressure that we're also doing. The picket is a very visible sign of the strength of our strike. It's a spectacle. It draws community support. It makes management very uncomfortable when they have to cross the picket to enter the office, when they have to work in the office and hear our chants all day. We've also called on sympathetic folks in the city council and other electeds to call management and put pressure on them to settle. I think that our management is interested in maintaining good relationships with city council and other legislatures, because those are ultimately the people that fund them. And so I think that it does make some difference when they hear from them. But definitely far and away, the main source of our leverage is just withholding our labor.
I guess in terms of, the bosses, the jobs y'all do are very important, like we talked about. And I understand that the reason the bosses, from the research I've been doing, they're refusing to pay you more, or at least, that was the reasoning, was because that they don't have public funding from the city, right? Or that they were saying that they don't make enough, for their to pay the workers. But I also understand that the CEOs or the people directing these organizations, that are publicly funded, like New York Legal Aid Assistance Group and like Bronx Defenders, are making like six-figure salaries, while the workers, you said, are not making, even $50,000, or were making that. So, that's not enough to get by in New York City. So, can you talk about like that a little bit, like the difference of, them having six-figure salaries and you not, and where this we don't have the money is coming from?
Yeah, so some of our CEOs, it's not just six figures. The CEO at one of our shops, Canva, makes over $600,000. Um, upwards over 500,000. And that's absolutely disgusting. Paying yourself that much when you're asking workers to live on $50,000 or less in the most expensive city in the country, just absolutely disgusting. And I think it goes to show how out of touch they are with our experience. Whether that's on salary, the CEO at one of our shops, when workers asked for a 70K wage or asked for more, they said, "Well, it's only a few workers making under 55,000, and I think that's a living wage anyways." He's not living on that. He's not agreeing to cut his salary to 55,000, and so that's so hypocritical and such an out of touch thing to say. And I think it's similar on workload. I mean, these CEOs ask us to take on these really insane caseloads that are way too high. But they're not having to work those caseloads themselves. They're not in court every day. They're not on the phone with clients every day. And so they don't actually, if they ever have been a caseworker, it was years ago, and they've forgotten now that they're in the C-suite.
Yeah, I think the other factor, right, is that like, they'll say that, we don't have the legal aid bosses will tell you they don't have the money for wage increase. But, it's totally false and absurd on its face because, we're talking about New York City here, which is home to Wall Street and like 123 billionaires. Like this makes the city the most billionaires globally, right? The city's billionaires have a combined net worth of $759 billion dollars. And New York City also has 744 individuals with over $100 million each in investable wealth. So, is your strike demanding that both the living standards for public attorneys and legal aid services be fully funded by taxing the rich, especially right now during the brutal crackdown by the Trump administration on, immigration? Like you said, there's, immigration and housing are big things that y'all are having extra caseloads on. So, it would make sense that like we should also be fighting for taxes on the rich since there is so much wealth in New York City to fund legal services for those things right now. Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, we definitely need higher taxes on the rich. We need wealth taxes. Um, we need to end their freeloading. There also needs to be reallocation of public resources. There's always enough money for the NYPD. There's always enough money for more policing. But then there's not enough for public defenders and folks that are trying to keep people out of jail instead of put them in jail.
Yeah. And then another thing I'll say is the Democratic Party controls the mayor's office, right, with Eric Adams. And they also have 45 out of 51 seats in New York City Council. So what do you think the role of the Democratic Party has been in chronically underfunding the legal aid in the city? With them playing such a big role in city council, why can't they afford to, why aren't they paying for, funding legal aid?
Well, I think they're representing the billionaires in our city who don't want higher taxes, and they're representing law and order interests that are interested in funding the NYPD over public defense.
Absolutely. I fully agree with that. One thing I wanted to ask about too is in Seattle, Washington State, a former city council member, Shama Sawant, who's a socialist and a founder of my organization, Workers Strike Back, she used her city council office to build mass movements to win working class victories. In fact, Workers Strike Back is founded on the example of decades of historic victories by Shama's independent socialist city council office in Seattle. And in 2020, Shama fought the Democratic Party and the city's elite and organized mass rallies and democratically organized action conferences to fight and win the Amazon tax, a tax on Amazon and other big businesses. And in 2021, as part of her annual People's Budget movement, Shama's office also won public funds for the right to a free lawyer for anyone facing eviction in Seattle. It sounds like you were talking about that in New York, something similar as well for your job. Have the city council Democrats, especially some of them who are like Democratic Socialists of America members like Tiffany Caban, Alexa Avilas, and Shahana Hanif put forward similar demands and organized like a fight back. Like, is anyone in city council trying to do anything like what she did in Seattle, mobilizing a movement to, take on the Democratic Party and fight to win taxes on the rich to fund your services?
The biggest changes I've seen happen in New York City, I mean, for example, the creation of my job that came out of the tenants movement, that came out of uh, tenant associations and tenant unions across the city organizing and demanding representation in eviction cases. And in terms of uh, higher pay and better conditions for legal services, I mean, that's coming out of our strike. Very focused and I'm mostly watching uh, uh, things, strikes, labor struggles, tenant organizing, and that's where I've seen the most change come out of.
Yeah, I think like that is where we need to be putting our, we need to have an organized movement of, rank and file workers in the labor movement who are pushing and fighting for these things. In my view, like the city and state government, right? Like we talked about, they should be taxing the rich. But because the Democratic Party is a party of the bosses and the billionaire class, they'll always oppose taxing Wall Street. And that's why Workers Strike Back is calling for a new party for working people. Do you think we should have a new mass working class party that goes to war against the rich and both the parties of the billionaire class and fights unapologetically for working people?
I'd love a party of the working class.
Another thing that we talked about earlier that I want to get back to is I've seen like a lot of posts in news over the last year about UAW Local 2325 workers being very active in the anti-ICE and the anti-genocide movement. And I wanted to ask you some about like what that looks like on the ground in New York City, in what ways UAW members have supported calls for an end to the genocidal war on Gaza and to end all military aid to Israel, and also what workers have done to stop deportations and that sort of thing.
During the first Trump administration, ICE was coming into courthouses and arresting people, detaining people in courthouses. And one thing that workers in my local, is they had a demand that the courts ban ICE officers from the courthouses. At first, court administration refused. They asked politicians to pass legislation to ban ICE from the courthouses. The politicians refused. They said it was out of their hands. And so the workers took it into their own hands. They started walking out whenever ICE was in the courthouse, and they basically told the courts, they told the city, you have to decide. Do you want public defenders in the courthouse or do you want ICE in the courthouse? Do you want the proceedings to continue or do you want to let ICE in? So they started walking out, and then all of a sudden, the court administration found the power to ban ICE from the courthouse, and all of a sudden, the government found the power to pass legislation to ban ICE from the courthouses. In terms of uh, solidarity with Palestine and ending the genocide, my local has been very vocal. We've passed numerous resolutions in support of boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel. We've passed numerous resolutions in solidarity with the Palestinian people and the Palestinian Union, the Palestinian labor movement. We've come under attack from numerous right-wing and Zionist forces. Um, the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, Congress, they investigated us for our Palestinian solidarity. We had a lawsuit which tried to halt and tried to stop our vote on one of our Palestine solidarity resolutions. We've been sued by right-wing impact litigation firms that are trying to suppress Palestinian activism and use Palestinian activism as an excuse to spread to pass right to work and anti-union legislation nationally. But so far, we've been really resolute. We've been unintimidated. We have fought back against every one of these attacks, and we've continued unapologetically in our solidarity with Palestine.
That's awesome. I love hearing both those stories about the, obviously the solidarity with Palestine and the walkouts against ICE raids and the first Trump administration. I also want to talk kind of about things that like we can do that like hasn't been done yet to stop deportations. Like for me, that's like mass strike action and civil disobedience. I think that, the first example you pointed to, points to that, like walking out of the courthouse, things like that. But also how like, when UAW was first formed, like that's how workers won their demands. Like whatever the demand was, like can be won through mass strike action or civil disobedience. But when UAW formed and the workers went on strike at GM in 1937, there was a mass wave of sit down strikes. That's civil disobedience and mass strike action, all across the country with rank and file workers taking militant action. And today, in the context of Palestine, There's the example of dock workers in France and Italy and Greece now refusing to ship weapons to Israel, or load ships that are heading to Israel to continue the genocide. And there's also been mass protests around the country. And I think that strikes like this one at your local, across this whole sector of legal aid can also be, effective in bringing an end to the deportation machine, causing a disruption to the machinery, or in other words, the court system that pushes for those deportations. Do you think that organized labor has a role to play in bringing an end to the genocide in Gaza and deportations? And do you agree that we need to organize mass strikes to disrupt the machinery of U.S. imperialism?
Of course. The ruling class, they're very interested in uh, the work we do, the work that all workers do in terms of allowing them to continue make their profits. And if we withhold that in a coordinated way as an entire working class, then they'll be forced to meet our demands, whatever those demands are, whether it's ending their wars of empire and ending their genocides, ending their deportations, whether that's higher salaries or ending wars. We have the power to do it if we uh, take coordinated mass strike action.
Absolutely. And then I guess like the last thing I want to ask you is about like if people want to support workers in your local who are already on strike, is there a way they can do that? Is there a way they can follow the strike? Where should people go for more information if they didn't get their questions answered here?
You can follow our local on Instagram and on Twitter or X at ALAA 2325, and we share all of our updates there.
Thank you for taking the time to do the interview, Navruz. And I hope you the best of luck in the agreement and getting the rest of the workers in your local full solidarity with all of them, and hope that the strike brings the demands that y'all are fighting for. And I hope you win.
Thank you. Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
To what you were saying earlier about the billionaire class having control over many of our politicians and the Democratic Party, and then also our CEOs not always being having the best interest of workers in mind. I think that this kind of really comes together in a really insidious way in our nonprofits, specifically on our boards. Our organizations, these legal service providers, we're publicly funded. Our work happens with public tax dollars. And yet, we are not democratically managed organizations. We are controlled by boards that are overwhelmingly comprised of by millionaires and by billionaires and their representatives. Our boards are full of people from private equity, from corporate big law firms. And I think that is really evident in the way that they govern our organizations, whether that's bringing the austerity logic of lower pay and higher workloads to our organization, whether that's attempting to suppress worker political autonomy. This is a natural extension of their class interests, of the class interests of our board members. And they do this on the cheap. At my organization, over 3/4 of our funding comes from public sources, comes from the public's tax dollars.
The mass solidarity and coordinated strike action across sectors in this strike is really important. That is an important part of what we call class struggle unionism. In other words, the kind of unionism that puts maximum pressure on the bosses by shutting down business as usual. The rank and file of the labor movement needs to push for many more coordinated and unified strikes in all sectors if we are not only going to win battles for strong contracts, but to go on the offensive to win major gains for the entire working class, such as free healthcare for all by taxing the rich, rent control, and the end of the genocide and mass starvation in Gaza. I appreciated how Navaruz also spoke to the need to use mass strike action to fight for the demands for living wages, workload protections, and protection from persecution for their political views, such as opposition to the genocide in Gaza. I do think it's unfortunate that the strike was called off and workers went back to work prior to the vote by the union membership on the tentative agreement. This is an important question that is always posed when a tentative agreement is reached. If the union rank and file are dissatisfied with the TA, then they would need to vote to reject and vote to continue their strike to win bigger concessions from the bosses. But once the workers have already gone back to work, it's harder to return to the picket line and could create kind of a fait accompli. I strongly agree with Justin and Navruz that we need a new mass party for working people. UAW was the first union to endorse Zoran Mandami's campaign for mayor, and they did so energetically, calling out the billionaires and calling for a fighting movement of workers. But such movements have been smothered again and again inside the Democratic Party. Imagine the impact if UAW would put that offensive approach behind building a real fighting alternative. The question for us is, how do we make that happen? Here again, I think we need to look to the example of Kshama Sawant in Seattle, as I spoke to earlier. Kshama won 4 elections as an independent socialist and left Seattle City Hall undefeated after a decade. Kshama based herself on building militant mass movements, not trying to sweet-talk Democratic politicians or join their cozy club. She recognized that the Democratic Party is owned, lock, stock, and barrel by the billionaire class, and that we need to relentlessly fight for an independent working-class approach that isn't limited by what we're told is possible, but is based on the needs of working people. Kshama used her decade in office to relentlessly expose the betrayals and potential betrayals of the Democrats on the Seattle City Council and their party as a whole. That also put far more pressure on those politicians who then felt forced to vote for things they didn't want to in order to avoid damage to their political careers. This is how you win. But we need far more examples like this, and we desperately need our own party as working people. We are at a historic moment where the Democratic Party's approval ratings are in the toilet, as they should be, in part due to their full complicity in the genocide in Gaza, but also their countless attacks on working people in the U.S. We need to not let them whitewash their bloody crimes and instead fight for a break from the Democratic Party altogether. An important example of that you can support right now is Kshama Sawant's independent run for Congress against Democratic Party warmonger Adam Smith. Worker Strike Back members democratically voted to endorse and build Kshama's congressional campaign at one of our national Zoom membership conferences, and have been energetically taking up the struggle to elect the first ever Marxist to Congress in cities across the country. To learn more about how you can get actively involved and help bring Kshama's fighting approach to the national level, wherever you are, go to kshamasawant.org today. Like this video and subscribe to On Strike if you haven't already, and become a member of Worker Strike Back to help build this movement. By becoming a Worker Strike Back member, you can also help this broadcast. We don't run any ads, we don't accept any corporate money, and we rely entirely on donations from working people. Go to workerstrikeback.org and click on Become a Member. Solidarity.